Hello, friends. Hi. We're gonna have a special guest. 1 minute. Let me put in let me pin it. 1 minute. I'm pinning the message. Okay, post, pin it. All right, hey y'all. I don't usually do lives at nighttime. It's getting dark. Okay, anyway, so look, we've been having a lot of conversations recently about how men are fucking up, right? Like, men are fucking up and they're terrorizing our communities because they refuse to deal with their shit. They refuse to wrestle with toxic masculinity. They refuse to embrace vulnerability, and they are wreaking havoc in our communities, right? And so, yes, it is cathartic and really necessary for us to just clearly lay all of that shit out on the table. But I also wanted to talk about how men can move past that. And so I'm bringing on a guest. I'm really excited. Oh, he's already called in. Let's do it. Hi.
Hi,
How are you?
I am doing okay. I'm doing okay. Um,
Yeah, as
that's
good
the
as
best
can
I
be
can give you right
expected.
now. How are you?
I am same, actually. I was gonna say, I'm okay. I'm making it. I'm living. So first of all, thank you so much for taking some time. I so appreciate it. I mean, we've been going back and forth for like years now, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
All right, so just to lay the foundation, I first became familiar with you by just randomly watching a documentary produced by CNN called "The Feminist on Cell Block Y." And I was so moved by it. I mean, like, even just thinking about the first time I watched that, I was so emotional, and I cried so much about it. And can you talk a little bit about what that documentary was about and how you got involved?
Yeah, I went to prison when I was 19. I should start before that. I was failing out of the failed Los Angeles public school system when I was 14. Got brought into community organizing program for youth founded by my mentors Patrice Cullors and Mark Anthony Johnson. Trained as an organizer, first started learning about patriarchy, saw myself in it because I was all the way in it. Um, and when I went to prison, I was 19. I just remember how free I felt in those feminist men's groups from back when I was younger, and I sought to start one at the prison where I was in California, and that's what we did. And a few years later, CNN made a documentary about our program.
Okay. And so something that I remember about this was Bell Hook's texts were central to the kinds of teaching that you were doing in the prison. I'm super interested in how you got acquainted with her work.
Yeah, when I was 14, I was being brought into organizing spaces and feminist spaces. Those were the first feminist texts that I ever read. The
Yeah.
first feminist text I ever read was The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, and then We Real Cool, and All About Love, and more. So that was kind of the space from which I found a lot of healing and transformation and freedom. So those were the texts that I went to try to incorporate into the program for other young incarcerated men.
Yeah. Do you remember what about that work unlocked something in you?
It was just the truthiness of it. It was just so the way that Bell Hooks wrote about how men became come to be patriarchal, how we become initiated into patriarchy through her concept of soul murder, of like
Yeah.
what she said, the soul murder of little boys and little masculine identified children, rang so true with my lived experience. And I think really the book We Real Cool, speaking about black men and masculinity specifically, um, just really resonated with me. This idea that violence, because many times working class, poor men of color don't have access to the kind of patriarchal clout that comes with money. We don't have a rich father to give us $1 million loan like our president did. So we often look to the other pillars of patriarchy with from which to find our value, principally through violence and through like gender control, being better than cis women, trans women, and non-binary people being better than queer folks. And it was literally that is who I saw in the mirror at 14 reading those books. That's who I saw in my homies who I was in the streets with. And yeah, I just couldn't deny how true it was.
Yeah. So you mentioned something about, working class men. Sometimes when there are these discussions about progressive politics, I sometimes hear a sentiment that progressive politics are for rich people, educated people. Like, of course you think this way because you went to fancy schools, or of course you think this way because you have money. And I just think it's really important to underscore that, like, no, right? Like anybody can have access to a different kind of understanding. Anybody can embrace this kind of transformation. It just has to be accessible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Our work at Success Stories is about making it accessible. Actually, I think to the contrary, I feel like, not to go too friggin' on one, but like neoliberal progressivism is kind of designed to be very like flaunty and like, look how woke I am. And that actually doesn't liberate anybody. It's only when
Yeah.
we can take these concepts like patriarchy or transphobia or misogynoir and point like, how does this look in your real life, dude? When someone's walking by and you're hollering all kinds of madness at her, like, let's talk about that moment. You don't need to know the word misogynoir. That's actually not
Yeah.
what's important. Maybe eventually, but let's talk about the actual behaviors that we're enacting every day and how that affects actual people. And that is something you can do with anybody.
Yeah. Richie, you about to set me off, because let me just say, okay, let me go off a little, because,
Please
right,
do.
I have encountered so many men who know the right words, right, who know how to navigate with the progressive presentation, but in their interpersonal relationships, they're fucking up, right? In their interpersonal relationships, they are embracing domination and fucking up women's lives, but they don't care about that because they understand the lingo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's so many rewards for externalizing that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
it's all about the rewards. I mean, I feel you, and to the extent that I can, but yeah, because there's the rewards, the social rewards that come with acting out patriarchally, and then there's the social rewards that come with intellectually pretending like we're not doing that. And that's like a real challenge. Like, I feel like it takes a degree of, like, Bell Hooks talks a lot about integrity. It takes a real degree of integrity to be like, actually being a feminist man in a room full of women doesn't really accomplish anything. Being a feminist man in a room full of men is actually a lot more helpful, and you get a lot less pats on the back.
Yeah, yeah. So this is another thing about, I've been thinking a lot about how toxic masculinity, hypermasculinity is about performance for other men. And so I am interested in, how do you overcome the desire to perform in that way for other men? Like, how do you create a different kind of framework where the incentives are different?
That's that's probably the hardest part, to get rid of the desire to do that. I think just takes a lot of practice and like kind of re-founding, like re-anchoring in something else. So like in Success Stories, we start the program with getting folks clear on who they love the most and what they want to accomplish in life. And then we then take 12 weeks to talk about the way that patriarchy gets in the way of that, because we're trying to move their foundation. If our foundation is based in how patriarchal society and other men in particular see us, then that's what we're going to perform for. But if we can lock in on like love for our communities, love for what we're trying to accomplish, that helps move it. It doesn't mean that men or myself are never tempted to like perform in patriarchal ways. Like, I'm 29 now. I started feeling embarrassed about the little bucket that I was driving that my homeboy gave me when I got out of jail, and I recognize that is directly attached to patriarchy and feeling like I need to drive a certain car and that's a certain amount of. So the thing, what I'm saying is that it still comes up, but I think the practice is about like checking in with like what's really important to me, just doing like a little bit of an integrity check, and the more men we have doing that, the easier it will be for men to do that.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So something I was particularly moved by in that documentary was seeing the internal kinds of transformations. I think that, you know, feminist writers like bell hooks are always talking about how feminism frees men too, about how, yes, like hopefully those rewards, you know, will trickle down to women, right, and your communities, but ultimately, right, like if you are embracing a certain kind of masculinity, you are choosing to be in bondage, like you are taking on your own chains. So how do you get that message across?
Yeah, so we talk about how patriarchy doesn't oppress men, but it does repress men.
Yeah.
So it's not systemically damaging our lives and putting us in places of danger and against our will in the same way that it is for folks with other gender or non-gendered identities. But it is stopping us from being whole human beings,
Yeah.
and does lead us to harm ourselves and each other, even while simultaneously like offering us patriarchal power. And I put it in quotes not because that power doesn't have real uh, results, but just because we know that it comes at such a cost to our souls. So yeah, I think our job, like I was talking about, is to show like actually if what you really want to do is love your people, what you really want to do is like serve your community. What we found is when it boils down to it, that's what people want to do, and then we just have to do the hard work of showing like patriarchy is like a drug that we are addicted to that's actually stopping us from loving our people and serving our community, and we have to continuously check in with ourselves and other men who are on that path to try to stay on the right path, because the dominant culture is going to always try to sway us away.
Yeah. How many years have you been out of prison? Couple?
For 2 years.
2 years. Okay, time flies. I wonder if
Yeah.
you keep in contact with any of the people in the program.
Yeah, we've expanded the program now, from one prison to 11 prisons, a
Oh, I
county
love
jail.
this. I love this so much. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, we're in 11 prisons, the county jail, more reentry facilities than I can count. We're trying to go nationwide. So and many of the folks who are facilitators inside are now out and working as staff. Some of them are still in and working as staff. And yeah, we're just trying to grow. We see ourselves as an alternative to prison. We understand that men like myself, I robbed 3 stores because of the stories I was telling myself about my masculinity, and I didn't have to be beat almost to death by LAPD and locked away at gunpoint for 7 years. I just needed to challenge my patriarchy. So we're just trying to make a space where people can do that, and transform their behavior instead of buying into the criminal legal system.
Yeah. Somebody in the comments is asking, what's the name of the program?
It's called Success Stories Program. Our Instagram is at Prison Feminism. All of our socials is at Prison Feminism.
When we were prepping, there's so many ways to go with this. When we were prepping for this conversation, I asked you if you'd seen an interview that Mike Tyson did with Boosie, and somebody told me to like watch this, and you'll be amazed. And I was like, I don't want to watch that. And then I watched it, and then I cried, and I cried because first of all, I cry all the time. But I cried because Mike Tyson, who we know has this really horrible history, convicted rapist, and was imprisoned for that. That he has made so many changes, and that he was speaking so clearly and tenderly and empathetic to Boosie about relinquishing toxic masculinity in a way that I just don't see, right? Like, I just thought there was something so moving to me about the tenderness with which he approached the conversation. I know, as like a feminist woman, like I'm like ragey and I'm mad, like y'all need to stop fucking up. But then I realized, like, I wonder how often Boosie gets talked to like that. Like, I wonder how often, like, a man, like, is like, why are you like this? Or like, how did you get, like, I just was like, oh, there must be like a vacuum of like emotion and honesty. Do you think that men have enough outlets like that?
Absolutely not. I'm sorry. I'm still blown away by what you just said.
Oh,
That's not what I expected. When you had DM me and was like, "Did you see the Mike Tyson Boosie interview?" I thought it was going to be some terrible interview that would be the centerpiece of this conversation. That
no.
I would love to see that interview. I definitely got to watch that. But no, that's the approach that we've found to work. I also just want to affirm, like, as a person who's oppressed by patriarchy, it makes sense that you would respond that way. And those Mike Tyson has much more resource, and can have that conversation from a place of safety, like in a way that I'm not saying that women and non-binary people can't, as much as it's like, I know for me, I officially retired from talking to white people about racism in 2014. Like, I just don't do that anymore. So I can't do that in a way that feels good in my soul. But I as somebody, I can walk up to somebody who's committing street harassment and have a conversation from that perspective, like Mike apparently did with Boosie, because I'm safe, because
Yeah.
I'm not arguing for my livelihood, my survival to this person, my value. It's kind of like once removed in that way. But to answer your question directly, we don't have those spaces. Oftentimes, because like performative feminism is so common and comes with so many benefits, could even be monetary benefits, or because oftentimes patriarchy is so ingrained in us that we will be aggressive and patriarchal when trying to get someone to not be patriarchal, like on some quit talking to her like that, bro, for I beat your ass. Like, that is actually not a feminist move. That is not helpful, right? So yeah, it's really countercultural what I'm hearing you describe, Mike did, and that's the kind of spaces that we build in success stories, and it's the kind of spaces we need more of.
Yeah. I do want to underscore, people are asking questions in the comments. If y'all can use the official comments feature, we'll get to the comments toward the end. I wanted to ask you a question about capitalism. When you mentioned kind of internalizing a shame because of the car that you were driving, that reminded me of some conversations that I've been having recently about Black men, particularly really famous Black men, and how they are embracing a certain kind of politics because they believe that if we close the wealth gap or close the income inequality or buy up the block or whatever, then that will make us safer. And I'm like, that ain't okay. So how do we have new conversations, different kinds of conversations with men about the need to embrace an anti-capitalist politic?
Yeah, that's something that we do oftentimes success stories as well, because we'll ask people on our first week, what are your goals? And we'll get answers like to be a millionaire, to have my own business. And to have your own business or own your own house, and all those things can be good, but we take a whole week of discussion to really get into that, to see where is that coming from. Because what we're trying to show people is that your value is not based on what you have, the way that we're taught. Um, Now, if you're trying to achieve uh, freedom, if you're trying to achieve the ability to be able to take care of folks around you, like, those things can come from, a place of integrity and love. But if you're like measuring yourself on what kind of belt you have or what kind of car you drive or whatever, then you're still in it. Um, it's a difficult conversation to have, but that's the way that I typically try to have it with folks. Is like, we can't be basing our value in these things. But with Black men in particular, it's an easier conversation, because I'm just like, yo, we can't beat them by being them.
Yeah.
We will ultimately just oppress other people, right? A lot of these quote unquote success stories, no pun intended, of like these Black billionaires and stuff, they also have super extractive businesses where folks, oftentimes other Black folks, maybe folks in the global South, are like being exploited to enrich them. And that ain't it. That's not actually
Yeah.
how we're gonna get free.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think a good
So,
example is the Jewish community too.
oh,
Like, sorry, I was just thinking about how oftentimes, I'm thinking of Jay-Z's music, he'll often be like, we need to be like the Jews. Like, the Jews keep the money and the da-da-da-da-da. Like, keep the money in their community in a way that Black people don't. Um, and yet, Jewish community centers often have to be heavily guarded by white supremacist violence, because white supremacy actually doesn't care how long you keep your dollar in your community, right?
right.
And that is something that we should be looking out for when we think that Black people having more money is the answer.
Right, right, right. Yes. Okay. I think this is so good and so important. I wanted to ask you. I'm sure that in your work you have encountered many men who have embraced the ideas that you have taught, but also encountered men who are like, "Oh, sorry, not fucking with it." What do you think separates a man who is open to that kind of personal transformation from one who is just not ready to get there?
Well, I haven't met anybody, including myself, who just jumped on board from jump.
Mm-hmm.
Like it always kind of starts as, I think people want to hold on to our power, um,
Yeah.
even power that's harming others. Um, what separates folks who get, I think it's what's at stake. I think it's partially what's at stake versus what there is to gain. And when people when they can clearly see what there is to gain, folks usually are more willing to move.
Yeah.
Like there's all kinds of things about technique and how we talk to people and how we ask questions and how but ultimately I'm thinking of we've had facilitators who walked away who are like, I'm not doing this. And there's one in particular I'm thinking of, and he was like, because I feel like if I embrace this ideology that you're talking about, this black feminism of bell hooks, then I am disrespecting my father who taught me to be a certain way. Um, and it's like I'm putting this ideology over my father's ideology, and that felt really important to him in a way that he just wasn't willing to. He wasn't willing to get off it. Now, was he acting from a place of privilege and all the things? Yes, we know that. That his experience was like, I'm not going to disrespect my dad for some random book that you put in my hand, and that was like a learning moment for me because it helped me see like, okay, he must not see that there's anything in this to gain for him. He sees this as like something that I'm asking him to do or something that the program is asking him to do. And you're not going to do something for us at the expense of your dad. But if you see it as your benefit, you might make that choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh, this is why I think it's really important to have these conversations. I'm having this conversation with you. Earlier this week, I talked to a privileged white woman who does lots of research with other privileged white women. And this is about who do we think we are, right? Like it's about who am I going to be if I let this go? Like what's on the other side? And there's so much fear wrapped up in that. And our society is built up to enable that fear, to like keep you like rooted in that fear. And so yeah, of course it's gonna be scary to step outside of that.
Yeah, I think I often talk about people tell people when they're like, how do I talk to men about patriarchy? I tell them, obviously, with the caveat of like, depending on your gender expression, if you don't talk to men about patriarchy, that's okay too.
Yeah.
Because me in your position, I probably wouldn't. But if you do make that choice, or if you are a man, and I feel like you really should make that choice, it's important that you understand you're talking to somebody who believes they're in a fight and has their hands up, and you're asking them to put their hands down.
Yeah.
And what they think they're doing is the only thing that gives them value on the planet Earth, the only thing that's keeping them and their loved ones safe on the planet Earth, and you're asking them to put that down. Patriarchy teaches us that we are only valuable if we are real men, and we're only real men if we're violent, dominating folks based on their gender, having money, right? So you're literally telling me to give up my sense of self-worth, and I'm afraid to get punched in the face. And that is like the posture of heart that I've experienced to be the most effective when having these conversations, and understanding that aggression is the tool that we're taught to use. So like I had to get to a point doing this work where I was like, I might get punched in the face, like quite literally, and
Right.
understand that the more aggressive somebody's being, it's actually the more fearful. That's an expression of fear and insecurity
Yeah.
when they're acting like that. And I can't see it and take it personal and try to get aggressive back. It's like the more aggressive you're being, the more insecure you are, and therefore the more tender I am.
Okay. Okay. I like this. So I'm always interested in what role the media plays in reinforcing um, ideas about toxic masculinity and hypermasculinity. And I go back and forth about whether or not that is overblown because I understand that sometimes scapegoating the media is just an excuse to be like anti-black. But I wonder, I'm interested in, do you think that like music, television, movies, does that play a significant role in how men perceive their masculinity?
I absolutely do. That's why I started a record label and I'm producing films, because I'm like, we need to be able to see like patriarchy was sold to me as cool and regular, right? Like patriarchal music, patriarchal movies weren't calling themselves that. They weren't using $20 words to sell me these concepts about myself. They were just showing me cool shit and then slipping that in there. And I feel like we need to do the same thing with the feminist politic and with politics of integrity that end oppression.
Yeah.
We Because I know for me, like, um, I was 10 when I got to middle school because when my birthday is, and I walked in like super artsy kid, music kid, loved musicals and like the Spice Girls and colorful shirts. By winter break, I was wearing like giant T-shirts and talking about all these jumbles of numbers and letters that are the names of guns that I didn't even know. I'd never seen a gun before, but I saw the kids at school and I listened to the music and I learned how to be a thug from like connecting the dots and
Yeah.
understanding when 50 Cent, and when I was in sixth grade, 50 Cent was like the shit. And he said, what you know about AKs and AR-15s in that song, Wangsta, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew I needed to figure it out.
Right.
Um, and I sought to figure out what those things are. And within 8-9 years of that, I had them. Like, and because, so yes, very much so. Where we base our swag and our identity is so important. Now, I do want to be clear, I'm using a lot of hip hop references, but hip hop isn't the only kind of patriarchy. They like to, that's anti-blackness too, right? When people are like, we need to talk about toxic masculinity, get the rappers. Like, we didn't make this up, right? That is the black and brown response to American patriarchy. But the same is true if you watch a James Bond film, which up until
Yes.
recently it's all been a bunch of white boys. The same is true, to the music 100 years ago, where it was, I got my shotgun and my pickup truck, and I'm right. Like, these are, they're affecting the way that we see ourselves for sure. They're telling us what is cool and what is not cool. And as high school as it sounds, that's really important to human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so interested in the way that these ideas get disseminated and like reproduced. And whenever there's questions about why does you have to have that kind of message like in the music or whatever, a lot of artists are like, that's just what people want to see. Like, that's what sells the most. I talk about the images, representation of sexuality that Black women have to do, and I'm like, well, maybe they're right. Like, is that what, like, is that kind of masculinity? Is that kind of sexuality? Is that what people want to see the most? Like, I don't know.
I think it's hard to say, right? Because it's like the culture informs the media and the media informs the culture, and then we kind of get stuck in what becomes normalized. But I do
Yeah.
think it's important to point out, like, as someone who works in this industry, that the gatekeepers, the people who have the mass amount of capital, who get to decide who's going to be at the top of your Spotify playlist when you open up your phone,
Yeah.
are rich, white, capitalist, hetero men.
Yeah.
And they are assuming this is what Black audiences want to see. So that's what they put in front of us, and that's who they promote. Because I talk about patriarchy in hip hop all the time, and I think it's important to point out today, in this day and age, with this technology and this, like, you could listen to a playlist 24 hours long and never listen to a misogynist record. You could listen
Right.
to a 24-hour playlist and never listen to a cis man rap. In rap music today, there are so many like dope femcs, dope queer artists, so many. But are they getting the same promotion? Are they getting the same investment by an industry that's really controlled by three huge companies?
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's those corporations and those boardrooms who are decided what's getting invested in and what's not. There's artists that are dope. They're ready to go. They have the sound, they have the look, they have all the things, and they happen to have politics that are not the toxic masculine misogynist stuff that we're used to seeing. But they don't get the same. They just don't get the same play.
Yeah. 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 All right, so let's backtrack a little bit. We touched a little bit on how domination plays out in our interpersonal relationships. I think it's particularly pointed in romantic relationships. I'm wondering how the transformation that you have made toward a feminist politic has altered how you behave in a romantic relationship, in partnership.
I was just thinking about this today. It has altered the way that I behave. Um, you know, this is a really personal question, so I don't. But we're speaking publicly, so I don't want it to seem like what I'm about to say everybody has to do, or like in order to truly be feminist, this is what you have to do. But I was just thinking today, I actually can't be sexually casual the way that I was when I was younger. And that, not to say that there's something inherently patriarchal about being sexually casual. I don't believe that. But for me, myself, what enabled me to be able to do that when I was younger was the fact that every time I had sex with someone new, it was about like, ooh, like I'm the man now, like got her, like, And when I'm not looking for that kind of social reward from patriarchy, I'm actually not interested in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is just something that's kind of that's just an example of like, once I kind of switched my anchor from like, the more people I sleep with, the more of a man I am and the more valuable I am. Actually, the way that I relate to the world and that I relate to like the dating world or whatever, has changed significantly. And I think there's some complications that come with it too, right? Because in relationships with women, it's like the push and pull internally of like, I want to show up as feminist as possible. I want to make sure that I'm hearing this person. I want to make sure that I'm not seeking to dominate this person in any way. But I also really disagree with what this person's saying right now. Or I actually also really think this thing that's happening is really toxic. And how do I engage with that in a way that is where I'm not leaning on the patriarchal power that's given to me? And that's been something that I've done well sometimes, and something that I haven't done so well sometimes.
Yeah. I've also been curious about men who are like actually really feminists, not fake feminists, how you reconcile the idea that there are a lot of women who are progressive who do like some parts of patriarchy. Like, so like I try to have this conversation with like women and like my friends of like, y'all trying to pick and choose. Like, you want the parts of patriarchy that you think benefit you, but you want men to magically reject patriarchy every other time. And so how do you like, navigate that? You still want to be appealing and all that. Like, how does it work?
I appreciate that. I mean, I think that, internalized oppression is real, and we're all raised in patriarchy. And that's what I appreciate so much about like Black feminisms and like abolitionist feminisms, which are about like abolishing patriarchy as a thing, not just getting women into the seats of patriarchal power. Because I've been in conversations where like women were like being patriarchal and expecting patriarchal things of me, and I was like, nah. Now that's not to say it's reverse patriarchy. I'm not saying anything weird like that. I'm just saying that there are ways um, that folks are socialized to be, and I think we still have to resist it. And you're not just feminist just because you're a woman. Like, it doesn't work that way. Like, when I know there's somebody who I was like talking to, kind of like considering talking to, and I remember she just went on this rant about how like sex workers don't deserve any respect, and how like da 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 da, like just went like out of nowhere, and I was like, okay, cool, we just gonna be friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not someone who I'm actually gonna date. Or when I see something in somebody's story and they're like, if a man doesn't take you out, if he doesn't like pay, then he's not a real one, sis, or whatever. I'm like, cool, bet. So we're just gonna be like platonic, because it's like, that's not, yeah, I'm not, we can't play both sides like that.
Yeah, it's been a long week on the internet with the Birkin bag talk. Let's get to the questions. Okay. What are your thoughts on the men whose feminism is about wearing pink and flowers?
I mean, I love wearing pink and flowers, but there's a difference between being feminine and feminist. Like, just because you feel comfortable wearing that doesn't mean you're upending the system of oppression that exists. Like, I know hella. I remember I went out to eat one time, and the waiter appeared to be male identifying to me, but had like his nails painted. But when he got to our table, he was calling all the women at the table like honey and baby and all that type of shit. And I was like, your nails don't make that okay, bro.
Right. Also, some of that stuff is about trends. Like, I mean, in different points in times, different kind of stuff is trendy. Stuff that we would deem feminine, like in the 70s with the crop tops and the tight pants and all that. Like, but it's still like, you still patriarchal as fuck. Like, well, okay, okay. Next question. Is violence always masculine, a tool of the oppressor?
Is violence always masculine? A tool of the oppression. See, it's hard for me to define, like, what is masculine and what is feminine is so made up that it's hard for me to define what, like, if a thing is masculine or feminine, right? Like, masculinity and femininity are just swags. Like, they're just ways of being. Like you were just saying, like, in the 70s, you could be wearing booty shorts and that was seen as hella masculine. right? Like today that might be seen different. So is violence always masculine? Uh, I don't know. But to the second part of the question, like, is it always a tool of the oppressor? This is what I would say. The difference between self-defense and pride defense is if we're talking about oppression or not. So if you're being attacked, whatever you have to do to be safe, I wouldn't call that violence. But once you are safe and you keep going, because now you're going to teach the person a lesson, like our criminal legal system likes to do. Now that is always a tool of the oppressor.
Mm-hmm. So it's about whether or not you're being punitive, like whether or not you're just trying to enact punishment or not.
That's my understanding of it. Like, if someone's being attacked and you got to do what you got to do to be safe, doing what you got to do can look like running away. It can look like holding someone down. It might look like punching someone in the throat. But once they're down and you're just on them, like you just want to beat their ass, now you have transitioned into the tools of the oppressor.
Yeah. Yeah. So I understand what you're saying. I don't think necessarily equate violence with masculinity, but I do often equate violence with domination, and people of all genders can seek to dominate other people. Right. Okay. Um, Next question. What do you think the source of violence from males is?
Insecurity. Honestly, the quickest way to get value in patriarchy is through violence. That's why, like, if you see a man get pressured kind of in the corner and his like patriarchal masculinity is at stake, the easiest way to back on top is violence. Oh, someone stole from you, bro. You better go beat their ass. Like, whatever. Like, oh, you feel someone said some things to you, someone cut you off on the freeway, someone spoke over you in a meeting. Like, violence is the quickest way to show, like, but it's all based in insecurity.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Best books, shows, resources for men to embrace feminism and let go of toxic masculinity.
Ooh, books. The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, I think, is always step one. If they are black, then We Roll Cool by Bell Hooks for sure. Um, Films. I think the film that they did about success stories. I think the Feminists on Cell Block Y, that CNN did. I think that's not me being weird. I don't make any money off that film or anything
No,
like
it's
that.
so good, you guys. It's so good. It is.
I think it's important because it shows people doing it. Because like I'm also gonna say The Mask You Live In, which is a great one. But I think the difference between The Mask You Live In and the Feminist on Cell Block Y is The Mask You Live In makes the concepts very clear. The Feminist on Cell Block Y shows people, my homeboys, people I was locked up with, in the most patriarchal conditions you can imagine, actually doing the work. And I think it just like I've seen men see that movie and be like, oh, now I see a path. Like, it's one thing to make clear to me that I have a problem, but that's not the same as making clear to me the path to the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll also say, obviously, not a man, but like as a feminist, that film was so important for me, as I probably mentioned earlier, is that it's so easy for cynicism to creep in and be like, oh, these niggas ain't never gonna change. Like, why are we doing this? Like, we out here like wasting our time. I think it is really important to see those transformations happen in real time and to see real people's lives being changed. And like that like makes me like, oh, okay, like this is not all for nothing. Yeah.
I'm so
Um,
honored.
okay. Next. How would you respond to men that insist we don't need to view life through a gendered lens?
Um, that's just not true. I mean, I get real rhetoric with people. So if they were to say we don't need to look at gender, it's just about black people. Like, we just need to fight for black people. Period. I would let them. That's like an all lives matter stance. Like, you have people saying I'm oppressed in a way that you aren't, and if you're not taking the time to listen to them, um, and instead you're just assuming that they're wrong, then you are acting just like the people who do that to us. And it's literally that simple. I think people don't understand that you can be both privileged and oppressed at the same time under different systems.
Yes. Okay, next one. Oh, this is easy. What is the movie called? I was not able to hear it.
It's called The Feminist on Cell Block Y. If you just Google it, the link will come up. It's on CNN.com and it's on YouTube too.
Okay, I'm done. Last one. Is there a place for stay-at-home moms and working fathers in the feminism movement?
Yeah, of course. I think I understand what they're saying, like, because that's kind of like a traditional way of being, and it's like, well, can I still be feminist and still be a stay-at-home mom? I mean, I feel like I can offer my opinion here, but I feel like you could speak to it better than I can. But I
Yeah,
feel like,
sure. Okay, so here's what I'll say. For a long time, you know, like when I first really started studying like academic feminism, I was in college and I had a lot of white women professors. And a lot of the feminist texts that we were reading was about how women were oppressed in the home and like how we have to fight to get out of the home, right? And then I would go to the African American Studies department and it was like, Black women are being forced out of their homes. Like their children are being taken away. Like they don't have the opportunity to mother, right? And so I had to really reconcile the fact that for a lot of women, particularly poor women and women of color, Black women, Native women, right? That being able to care for your children, to mother your children, is just a privilege that many of us have not been afforded, right? And still, many of us are not afforded that. And when we try to make it a point that we're going to take care of our children, we're going to be there for them no matter what, we are called all kinds of shit, like our families are defective, we're welfare queens, and all that, right? So, absolutely, if you are practicing Black feminism, like a truly intersectional feminism, we have to understand that mothering is feminist work, right? And mothers are not just biological. Let me not go off on this, right? But like, like
well,
Patricia Hill Collins, like talks a lot about other mothering, right? Like a centerpiece of Black communities is we have all kinds of parental figures, all kinds of guiding figures, right? And we need all of those kinds of people to have a strong community. So I would absolutely say that you can be a stay-at-home mom or a working father or whatever and be feminist. Totally. People have sent in more questions. How to communicate with cis men talking at over others.
yeah, I think every time I answer these questions, I feel like I just don't want anyone to feel like I'm placing a mandate on people who are oppressed by other people's behavior to be the ones to take that up. But um, my experience has been to understand that I'm talking to an insecure person, and that when I bring it up, their insecurity is going to come up, and they're going to respond from a place of fear, and probably with more aggression. And it's just going to take some tenderness and some patience to get them to a point where they hear me, and it takes a minute. But that's what I've experienced. This what I found to be best, like as a man, is when I speak about my patriarchy first and model that vulnerability, other men are willing to do the same. But when I get it, someone like, you are this, you are that, you shouldn't be doing this, then it can become like a pride thing.
Okay. Why do you think queer folks uphold toxic masculinity despite it being anti-queer? Now, I'm a straight person, so I'm gonna stay in my lane. But I will say that domination is very, very appealing, no matter what your identity category is. I think we see it all the time that even if you are oppressed, you still have the ability to enact oppression upon others, domination on others, because those are the messages that we are taught in this society, that it's our duty to try to improve our station in life, and that requires being violent to other people. To speak to the anti-queer piece in particular, I don't know if that's for me to do, but that's all I have to say about that. Do you have anything?
Same.
Okay. I want to be feminist, but guilt and shame from former harms prevents me from calling myself feminist. Oh, that's interesting.
Hmm. I feel like that feels like very personal. Like I feel like I would want to know what they're talking about. But I am familiar with people who are like opposed to the word. Yeah, that's something that I've heard before of like, but I'm used to hearing it like, I can't use that word because that's like a white woman's word and that was never for Black people, and like how to respond to that. In which I tell people, call it whatever the hell you want, but let's just like knock this patriarchy shit out.
Right. I mean, what I will say is, my mantra, put it on a T-shirt, like print it out, is I would not be a feminist if I did not think people can change. So that means I
Mhm.
think that people are capable of committing enormous harms, potentially devastating and catastrophic harms, and still being recovered, right? I do think that you have to, if you are participating in harm, that you have to be invested in repair and restoration and like making amends and all that. Like that's really important work. But I don't think that anybody is disposable. I don't think that like no, you can, we have to throw everybody out once they've done some shit. Now, the problem often is that people be trying to skip steps, right? So, like, if
Hmm.
you are willing to commit to doing the work, I absolutely think that you can get to a place of truly, genuinely calling yourself a feminist. Totally. Okay. What else do we have? How do you think organizations geared towards men can work, can decon, wait. How do you think organizations geared towards men can work to deconstruct their toxic culture?
Like basically organizations that have like toxic masculine culture like written into the org.
I think
Like
that they're basically talking about your organization primarily serves men, right?
so far, yes, but we
Okay.
are developing curriculum for folks of all various gender identities.
Yeah. So I think that she is saying that men have a toxic culture of patriarchy and domination and harm. And so, how can those organizations undo that? I think you've kind of gotten into that before earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Let's. Okay. Oh, 723. How can Black men evaluate their particular relationship to white women? Oh.
ooh, child. Name a more dynamic toxic duo of black men and white women. I think what's particularly challenging about black men and white women is that we are groups of people who are very oppressed in one way and very privileged in another way, who often see ourselves through the lens of our oppression, um, and erase the ways that we oppress others. Um, that's one thing. To answer the question more directly, I think black men just need to be talking about misogynoir and the hatred of black women and how that shit has been so normalized and how we have 1,000,000,000 songs talking about I only date light skinned girls and all of that, and the way that black women are seen as like too aggressive. And I think it's all throughout the media, the way characters, yeah, there's just so much there. My personal take is I just fucking go for the jugular on that one. I grew up in a family where all the black men have white wives. I had one black auntie that I grew up with, um, and yeah, I just when my homies come to me and they're like, "Oh, I'm dating this girl, Suzanne," I'm like, "Bro, what's going on?" Like straight up, I just have to have it straight. I don't know how to be delicate with that conversation. I'm like, we just gonna talk about this right now.
Um, okay, so I would say that you know, I think it is important for Black men to listen to Black women. I think Black women have spent so much time thinking through this, talking about it, writing about it. It's just at this point very frustrating that we have to keep talking about how, as we've mentioned a couple of times in this chat, you can experience oppression but also enact oppression. You can experience oppression, but also be complicit in the systems that harm other people in your communities. White people, I mean, white women in particular, do that shit all the time to women of color. Black men do that shit all the time to Black women. I mean, how many times we gonna say it? Like, how many more times are we gonna have to go through this? Okay. Has patriarchy colonized masculinity?
Yeah, I think the very idea of masculinity is like patriarchal in and of itself, but yeah, that's not to say that if you're a masculine, you're inherently patriarchal. Um, but the whole idea of like gender, it's all based in patriarchy. It's all based in who gets to dominate who. So I would say yeah.
Yeah. Okay, last one. How do we deal with selective feminism?
Ooh,
I'm not exactly sure what that means.
I feel like what they're saying is like the like we were talking about earlier, like feminism that is for certain kinds of people, right? Feminism like trans exclusionary feminism and black exclusionary feminism and things like that. I just feel like we got to be loud and just not go for it. Like, not be complicit in that shit.
Yeah, I do think it's important to consistently call out inconsistencies. I also think something I've been really, really trying to lean into right now with regards to the way that I approach people about how they're fucking up is to be the most dogmatic, like the most persistent with the people who I have the most access to, the people who I actually know intimately and like am in community with, because I understand that they are the people who are going to be most able to receive the messages that I'm trying to give them. Like I'm really focused in my work now about being really local, like hyper local, not always about it being a performance, but about being like rooting this stuff in my relationship to you, in my connection to you. Like, I feel like that's where the change is really going to happen. That's just what I've been thinking of.
Sure.
Okay, it's 7:28. Last one more. This is funny. Is it wrong to automatically assume that cishet black men are sexist, homophobic, transphobic?
I mean, again, I play word games with people. I don't know whether it's right or wrong. I know that it's a fair assumption.
Yeah.
Like, when I just had an experience literally yesterday. I was at the mailbox in my building, and it was nighttime. It was dark. A person came up to check her mail. I'm assuming she looked like a woman. I said hello. She completely ignored me. I kind of felt a way about it, but I understand though. Like, I understand that based on her lived experience, there could be so many things behind my hello, and I think it's less about pushing her and telling her that she's wrong for assuming anything about me, and more about pushing people who look like me to show up for people like her, and then maybe people won't make assumptions about us.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a man came up to me at the gas station a couple of weeks ago, and I immediately was like, stranger danger. Okay, sir? Like, I don't know. Like, and then I was like, oh, well, he could have been but you know what? I don't know. But yes, thank you. That's all we have. Thank y'all so much for submitting your questions. Thank you so much, Richie. Everybody, be sure to follow Richie, follow your organization. What was it called?
It's at Prison Feminism. I'll put it in the
At
thing.
at Prison Feminism. Whenever I post this, I'll make sure to tag it. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Thank you, Richie.
Thank
Have
you
a
so
good
much.
day. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
All right, that is it, you guys. I never do lives this late at night, but obviously that was worth it, right? Again, clips of this will go up on the Instagram. The clips that don't go up on the Instagram will be on Patreon, patreon.com/for Harriet. Thank you so much for supporting. I will talk to you Sunday. I'm having somebody on here Sunday. My cousin Camille, who is a professor of political science at Villanova. We're going to talk about the Black Party. We're going to talk about polling. We're going to talk about the election on Sunday. See you then. Bye.